At Chicago's most exclusive charity gala, Charlotte Reynolds discovered the truth that would destroy her perfect life. But when she confronted her husband Blake about his affair, she never imagined he'd respond with violence, grabbing her pregnant belly, threatening to take everything, including their unborn child. What Blake didn't know, Charlotte's father had been watching, waiting, and for 6 months, he'd been building a case that would bring down a predator who'd destroyed women for over a decade. This is the story of how one woman's courage to fight back didn't just save herself, it exposed a monster hiding behind a charming smile. If you love stories about justice and revenge, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss our dramatic true life stories. Now, let's begin. Charlotte Reynolds smoothed the emerald silk over her 7-month pregnant belly. The dress had cost more than her first car, but Blake insisted she looked perfect for the Chicago Real Estate Excellence Gala at the Peninsula Hotel. "You look beautiful," Blake said, appearing behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders. At 35, her husband still turned heads. "My stunning wife." Charlotte met his eyes in the mirror. "Thank you for getting the dress altered." "Anything for you." He kissed her head, then reached for the zipper. His phone buzzed on the dresser. Charlotte glimpsed the screen, Vanessa Pierce, a winking emoji before it disappeared. "Your assistant is working late," Charlotte said, keeping her voice light. Blake's fingers paused on the zipper. "Just for a second. Big presentation, Monday. She's dedicated." He finished zipping. "You know how important this gala is? Half the commercial real estate investors in the Midwest will be there." "I know." Miss Charlotte had heard about this event for months. Blake, as vice president of Harrison Commercial Properties, treated it like his coronation. "I promised to behave." "I didn't say you wouldn't," but his smile tightened. "Just remember, people are watching. My partners, their wives. First impressions matter." Charlotte nodded, ignoring the flutter of unease. Blake was stressed about work. That was all. She'd been with him for 3 years, married for 2. He handed her diamond earrings. "Wear these, they match your ring." As Charlotte fastened them, Blake picked up her phone. "Let me check if Grace texted back." "I can do that. I've got it." He scrolled through her messages. "Nope, nothing from Grace." Charlotte took the phone back, that unease growing. When had she told Blake she was waiting to hear from Grace? "We should go." In the elevator, Blake took her hand. "Remember what we talked about, stay close to me tonight. Don't wander off without telling me." "I was sick last year. Morning sickness. Tonight's different. You're further along. You'll be fine." The Peninsula's grand ballroom glittered. Crystal chandeliers cast light across 500 guests. Charlotte recognized faces from business magazines, developers, investors, politicians. Blake Harrison, a silver-haired man, clapped Blake's shoulder. "This must be Charlotte. Congratulations on the little one." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Charlotte shook his hand. Blake's arms circled her waist, pulling her close. "We're thrilled. Due in February. Your husband tells me you're taking time off from work." "Just maternity leave. I'm a marketing director at Peterson and Associates." "Were," Blake corrected smoothly. Charlotte decided to focus on being a mother. Charlotte's smile froze. "I'm planning to return after 6 months." "We'll see." Blake's fingers pressed into her side. A warning. "A lot can change." "Right, sweetheart." Caldwell chuckled. "My wife said the same thing. 30 years later, she's still at home." As Caldwell moved away, Charlotte turned to Blake. "I never said I was quitting." "Not here." His voice dropped. "Smile. Senator Williams is watching." Charlotte smiled. She was good at that now. Smiling when Blake corrected her. Smiling when he checked her phone. Smiling when he decided what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, when had it started. The controlling questions disguised as concern. The casual surveillance presented as helpfulness. The slow erosion of her independence. So gradual she hadn't noticed until she was 7 months pregnant and financially dependent. "There's Vanessa," Blake said, nodding toward the bar. Charlotte's stomach clenched. Vanessa Pierce stood out in a red dress, 26, blonde, laughing with a senior partner. "She cleans up nice," Charlotte said. "She's good at her job, excellent with clients, Blake steered Charlotte toward their table. I'm lucky to have her. Charlotte watched Vanessa's eyes track Blake across the room. The younger woman's gaze slid to Charlotte's belly, then returned to Blake with a smile that made Charlotte's skin crawl. I need to use the restroom, Charlotte said. Blake's hand tightened on her elbow. Already pregnant. Remember small bladder? Fine, don't take 20 minutes. He kissed her cheek, his lips cold. I'll order you water. In the ladies' room, Charlotte braced her hands on the marble counter. The woman staring back looked elegant, composed, successful. She looked nothing like someone trapped. Maybe she was paranoid. Maybe pregnancy hormones were making her see threats that didn't exist. The door opened. Two women in their 50s entered, talking in low voices. Everyone knows about Blake Harrison and his assistant. One said, poor wife. She has no idea. Oh, she knows, the other replied. Women always know. She's just hoping it'll stop after the baby. Thus Charlotte was in a stall, hidden from view. It won't. Men like that don't change. My cousin worked at Harrison Properties 3 years ago. Blake was sleeping with a junior analyst then. Got her fired when she wanted more. Disgusting. And his wife seems so sweet. Sweet and naive. Classic combination. They left. Charlotte leaned against the stall door, her heart hammering. Everyone knows. Everyone except her. When Charlotte returned, Blake was deep in conversation with Vanessa at their table, their heads close together. Vanessa's hand on his arm. As Charlotte approached, they separated smoothly. Feeling better? Blake asked, pulling out Charlotte's chair. Much better, Vanessa smiled. Mrs. Harrison, you look radiant. That's kind, Vanessa. Charlotte sat carefully. Working late tonight. Always. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. Your husband is a demanding boss, but I enjoy the challenge. The double meaning hung in the air. Blake's phone sat face up on the table. As Vanessa walked away, it buzzed. Charlotte caught the preview before Blake grabbed it. Can't wait until she delivers and you're free. Charlotte's hands shot out. Let me see that. Blake pulled the phone away. It's work stuff. Boring contract details. Show me the message. Charlotte, his voice carried a warning. You're being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones. Show me your phone. Blake, his jaw tightened. Around them, conversations continued. To anyone watching, they looked like a married couple having a minor disagreement. We're not doing this here, Blake said quietly. Then we'll do it at home. Tonight. I want to see your phone. Blake leaned close. You really want to cause a scene at the most important event of my career? Think very carefully. Charlotte, think about what happens if you're wrong. But she wasn't wrong. She could see it in his eyes, flat and cold, in the muscle jumping in his jaw. In the way Vanessa watched from across the room with barely concealed satisfaction, Charlotte had been wrong about everything else. Wrong to trust him. Wrong to think he loved her. But she wasn't wrong about this. Blake excused himself to network, leaving Charlotte alone. She watched him work the room with practiced charm, playing the role of successful executive with a beautiful pregnant wife. Except his mistress was 20 feet away, also working the room. Blake's phone sat next to his abandoned drink. He never left his phone unattended, never let her touch it. Unless this was a test, Charlotte didn't care anymore. She picked up his phone. His passcode was her birthday. That detail felt like a mockery now. She opened his messages and found Vanessa's thread. Only the last few texts appeared. Everything older had been deleted. But Blake wasn't tech-savvy enough to know about recovery tools. Charlotte was a marketing director. She knew exactly how to retrieve deleted data. She took screenshots. Vanessa, this charade is exhausting. When are you telling her? Blake, after the baby comes, I can't leave a pregnant woman. Looks terrible. Vanessa, I'm not waiting forever. You promised we'd be together. Blake, you will be. She trapped me with this pregnancy. I never wanted kids. Charlotte's hands shook. The baby kicked. She pressed a hand to her belly and kept scrolling. More screenshots. More evidence. Photos Vanessa had sent. Plans for weekend getaways while Blake told Charlotte that he had business conferences. Hotel receipts. A message from 2 months ago. Can't believe she actually thinks you love her. You should win an Oscar. Blake's response. It's not hard. She's desperate to believe in fairy tales. Charlotte's vision blurred. She forwarded everything to her own phone, then to Grace Mitchell's number. I need a divorce attorney. It's urgent. Grace's response came instantly. OMG, I'm calling you right now. Charlotte silenced her phone and deleted the forwarding evidence from Blake's message history. Her hands moved mechanically. Some distant part of her brain noted the steadiness of her fingers. She put Blake's phone back exactly where he'd left it. Across the ballroom, Blake laughed at something Chicago's deputy mayor said. Vanessa stood nearby, her smile secretive. Charlotte stood up. Her chair scraped loudly. Several people glanced over. She walked toward Blake's group. Each step felt surreal. Blake, Charlotte's voice cut through the conversation. We need to talk, now. Blake's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. Sweetheart, I'm in the middle of something important. So am I. I'm in the middle of discovering my husband is a lying piece of shit. The words came out loud enough for the deputy mayor to hear, for the senior partners to hear, for Vanessa to hear. The circle went silent. Blake's face flushed. Charlotte, you're not feeling well. Let me take you. I know about Vanessa. Charlotte's voice stayed steady. I know about the hotels, the deleted messages, all of it. I saw your phone. Blake's mask cracked. Rage flashed before he smoothed it away. You went through my phone, are you serious? Yes, I invaded your privacy. How terrible. Much worse than you fucking your assistant while your wife carries your child. Vanessa gasped. The deputy mayor's wife made a sympathetic noise. Lower your voice. Blake moved closer, his hand reaching for Charlotte's elbow. You're embarrassing yourself. Pregnancy hormones. Don't touch me. Charlotte stepped back. Don't ever touch me again. Mrs. Harrison, Vanessa said, false concern dripping. I think you're confused. Blake and I have a professional relationship. Maybe you should sit down. Save it. Charlotte kept her eyes on Blake. I have the messages, the photos, everything. I forwarded them to my attorney. Blake's face went white, then red. His hand shot out and grabbed Charlotte's wrist, fingers digging in hard. You did what? Blake, you're hurting me. I'll do more than hurt you if you've been sending my private messages to anyone. His voice dropped to a hiss, but people could hear. Do you have any idea what you've done? Those are confidential business communications. Business communications. Charlotte tried to pull free. His grip tightened. That's what you're calling them. Mr. Harrison, the deputy mayor said quietly. Maybe you should let your wife go. Blake looked around, suddenly remembering where they were. The small crowd had grown, 20 people openly watching, phones out, recording. He released Charlotte's wrist but didn't step back. We're going home. Now, you're clearly not well. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. Blake's hand moved to Charlotte's lower back, gripping the fabric hard. To observers, it might look supportive. Charlotte felt his fingers twist the silk. We're leaving before you make this worse. Worse for who you, Charlotte raised her voice deliberately. Everyone here should know what kind of man Blake Harrison really is. He cheats on his pregnant wife. He lies to everyone. And right now, he's hurting me in front of all of you. Vanessa stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, I think you're having some kind of episode. Blake has been nothing but kind to you. Everyone can see you're not yourself. An episode? Charlotte laughed harshly. You're good, but I have screenshots of you telling Blake how you can't wait for me to give birth so he can leave me. Want me to project them on the ballroom screen. Blake's hand moved from her back to her arm, yanking her toward the exit. That's it? We're done here. Charlotte stumbled. She would have fallen if Blake hadn't been gripping her arm. The baby kicked hard, and Charlotte cried out. The baby. Stop being dramatic. Blake pulled her through the crowd. People stepped aside, faces showing shock and discomfort. No one intervened. You're fine. The baby's fine. You're just hysterical. They reached the marble hallway outside. A catering staff member, a security guard, a couple near the windows. Blake shoved Charlotte against the wall, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to make his point. You just ruined my career. Do you understand that years of building my reputation, and you destroyed it in 5 minutes? I'm not paranoid. You admitted it. I said what I needed to say to keep Vanessa happy. She's a valuable employee. I was managing her. Not fucking her. You're still lying. Even now, caught with evidence, you're still lying. What evidence? Some out-of-context messages that proves nothing. Blake leaned closer. But you know what does prove something? You violating my privacy, stealing information, sending confidential communications to a third party. That's illegal. Charlotte, you're my husband. Try that argument in court. See how it works. Blake smiled, and Charlotte saw the real man for the first time. You want a divorce? Fine, but you'll get nothing. The prenup says infidelity has to be proven. Good luck when I have 300 witnesses who just watched you have a psychotic breakdown. People were recording. People were recording you making wild accusations while I tried to calm you down. Blake straightened his bow tie. Go home, Charlotte. We'll talk in the morning when you're thinking clearly. I want you to leave our apartment. It's not our apartment, it's mine. My name on the lease, just like the cars, the bank accounts, everything. You gave up your career to play housewife. You have nothing. The security guard approached. Sir, is everything all right? My wife isn't feeling well. I'm calling her a car. Blake pulled out his phone. Charlotte, where's your coat check ticket? Charlotte stared at him. This man she'd loved, married, created a child with. This stranger destroying her life with calm efficiency. I'm not leaving, she whispered. Yes, you are. Because if you make another scene, I'll have you removed. And then I'll file for emergency custody on grounds that you're mentally unstable and a danger to our child. Blake's voice stayed pleasant. The guard probably couldn't hear the threat. Is that what you want? Charlotte touched her belly. The baby kicked again. That's what I thought. Blake handed the guard a $100 bill. Would you mind calling a car for my wife? The guard pocketed the money. Of course, sir. Charlotte found her voice. I'm pressing charges for assault. Blake laughed. For what? I haven't touched you. You grabbed my wrist. You pushed me against the wall. That guard saw it. The guard shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I steadied you when you stumbled, Blake said smoothly. That's what everyone will testify. A concerned husband helping his unstable pregnant wife who violated his privacy and made false accusations. He paused. Think carefully about your next move. Charlotte, you have a lot to lose. I have nothing to lose. But he was wrong and Blake had everything to lose. Charlotte saw it suddenly, clearly. She just had to survive long enough to use it. Fine, Charlotte said quietly. I'll go home. Blake smiled. Good girl. Charlotte let the guard escort her to the valet stand. She climbed into the black car, gave her address, and watched the peninsula disappear. Then she pulled out her phone and called Grace Mitchell. I need help, Charlotte said when her friend answered. I need help right now. Charlotte sat in Grace Mitchell's home office at 2 a.m., wrapped in a blanket. The screenshots from Blake's phone glowed on Grace's laptop. This is good, Grace said. She was 34, a divorce attorney who'd built her career representing women leaving powerful men. This is very good. Clear evidence of adultery. The prenup becomes meaningless. He said I committed a crime by accessing his phone. He's wrong. In Illinois, spouses can access shared devices. The phone was left in your presence. You had implied consent. Grace scrolled through the messages. These texts about the baby, about trapping him, that establishes motive for potential harm. Charlotte pulled the blanket tighter. He threatened to file for custody, said I'm mentally unstable. Let him try. You're 7 months pregnant with no history of mental illness, and he's caught having an affair. No judge will grant him custody. Grace looked up. Did he hurt you physically? You said he grabbed your wrist. Charlotte pushed up her sleeve. Finger-shaped bruises were already forming, dark purple against pale skin. And he pushed me against the wall. Did anyone see a security guard? A few people in the hall. Charlotte's voice was dull. But Blake said everyone will testify he was helping me because I stumbled. Maybe. Maybe not. Grace grabbed her phone. Nathan Drake works in your building, right? He was at the gala. I saw his wife's Instagram. Let me text him. Nathan barely knows me. He knows you're not crazy, and he's not in Blake's pocket. Grace's phone pinged. He's awake, says he recorded some of what happened because it looked concerning. He's sending the video now. Charlotte watched as Grace downloaded the file. The video started shaky but quickly stabilized. Nathan must have been near the ballroom entrance when Blake dragged Charlotte into the hallway. The audio was clear. Blake's voice. "You just ruined my career." Charlotte's response. Blake shoving her against the wall. Charlotte's cry of pain. Blake's threat about custody. "This is gold," Grace said softly. "This is everything we need." Charlotte started crying. She'd held it together for hours. Now, watching the video, seeing herself from outside small and pregnant and trapped, the reality crashed over her. "He never loved me," she whispered. Grace moved to the couch, wrapping her arms around Charlotte. "I know. I'm sorry. How did I not see it? You weren't stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference." Grace held her. "Men like Blake are experts at making women feel crazy. He probably started small, right? Little comments about your judgment, your friends, your choices." Charlotte nodded. "He said he was worried about me driving when tired, worried about me working too much, about me spending too much time with you instead of with him. Classic isolation tactics. By the time you realized something was wrong, you were already dependent." Grace pulled back. "But you're out now. You saw the truth. You gathered evidence, and you're fighting back. That takes strength." "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified." "Good. Terror means you understand the danger. But you're not alone." Grace stood and grabbed a legal pad. "Here's what we're doing. First thing tomorrow, we're filing for a protective order and divorce. I'm attaching Nathan's video, medical photos of your bruises, and the screenshots. We're requesting full custody, child support, spousal support, and 50% of all marital assets." He said everything is in his name. "Doesn't matter. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. Assets acquired during marriage are marital property." Grace wrote quickly. "We're also reporting him to the police for assault and domestic violence. He put his hands on you, and there's video evidence." Charlotte touched her belly. The baby had finally settled. "What if he really tries to take her?" "He won't. I promised him." Grace set down the pad. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I know how men like Blake operate. They make threats to scare you. But when faced with actual consequences, jail time, public exposure, financial ruin, they fold. Blake's whole life is built on his reputation. He's not going to risk that. You don't know him. He's different when no one's watching." "I believe you. That's why we're moving fast." Grace checked her watch. "In 4 hours, the courthouse opens. We're going to be first in line. By lunch, you'll have a protective order. Blake will be served with divorce papers, and the police will have Nathan's video. He'll be scrambling to catch up." Charlotte wanted to believe her, but she'd seen his face tonight, seen the rage beneath the charm. "He's going to hurt me," she said quietly. Grace's expression hardened. "Not if I have anything to say about it. You're staying here tonight. Tomorrow, we're getting you moved to your father's house in Lake Forest. Blake won't know where you are, and by the time he figures it out, he'll be too busy with lawyers. I haven't talked to my dad in a month. Blake said he was too busy for us." "Blake lied about that too, I guarantee it." Grace pulled up her contacts. "Robert Reynolds and I go way back. Let me call him. It's 2:30 in the morning. He'll want to know his daughter needs help." Grace dialed. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered, alert and concerned. "Grace, what's wrong?" "Robert, I'm with Charlotte. She's safe, but she needs you." There was a pause, then carefully, "Put her on." Grace handed Charlotte the phone. Charlotte's throat tightened. "Dad, baby girl." Her father's voice cracked. "What happened?" Charlotte told him everything. The affair, the confrontation, Blake's threats, the bruises. When she finished, Robert Reynolds was silent for a long moment. "I'm coming to get you," he finally said. "Stay with Grace. I'll be there in 40 minutes. "Dad, it's the middle of the night." "I don't care. You're not staying in the city where Blake can find you." His voice changed, became something Charlotte had never heard before. Cold, calculated. "Grace, you still there?" "I'm here," Grace said on speaker. "Good. Start the divorce paperwork. Whatever Charlotte needs, bill me directly. I want the best investigators, the best experts, everything." Robert paused. And Grace, we're not just divorcing this son of a bitch. We're destroying him. Charlotte stared at the phone. This didn't sound like her father, the quiet, withdrawn man who'd retreated after her mother's death. This sounded like the investment banker who'd built a fortune through strategic ruthlessness. Robert, Grace said carefully, are you sure? I'm sure. I've been watching this marriage for 2 years, watching Blake isolate my daughter, control her, diminish her. I've been waiting for Charlotte to see it herself. His voice roughened. But now he's put his hands on her. Now he's threatened my grandchild. So yes, Grace, I'm sure, we're going scorched earth. After the call ended, Charlotte sat in stunned silence. Did my father just declare war, yes? Grace looked impressed. I always knew there was steel under Robert's quiet exterior. Looks like Blake just found out the hard way. At 3:15, Robert Reynolds arrived. He was 62 but looked younger, with silver hair and a lean build. When he walked into Grace's living room and saw Charlotte's bruised wrist, something in his expression went absolutely still. Show me the rest, he said quietly. Charlotte pushed up her sleeves. More bruises from Blake's grip. She turned to show the red mark on her back where he'd twisted her dress. Robert's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Grace, we'll need medical photographs for evidence. Can you recommend someone? I'll have Dr. Patricia Winters meet us at my office at 8. She's a forensic specialist. Good. Robert looked at his daughter. Charlotte, I need you to understand something. From this moment on, you're not fighting Blake alone. You have me, you have Grace, and you're going to have an entire legal team. Do you trust me? Charlotte nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Then let's go home. You need rest, and I need to make some phone calls. In her father's Mercedes, driving north toward Lake Forest, Charlotte watched Chicago's skyline disappear. Somewhere in that glittering collection of steel and glass, Blake was probably still at the gala, charming investors. He had no idea what was coming for him, but Charlotte did. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something besides fear and grief. She felt hope. Charlotte woke in her childhood bedroom at 7 a.m. Her phone showed 37 missed calls from Blake, 15 text messages, progressing from concern to anger. She blocked his number and went downstairs. Robert was already in his study, on the phone. Yes, I understand the timeline is tight, but this takes priority. I need the forensic accounting done by end of business today. He hung up and looked at Charlotte. Grace is sending to WAR. We have appointments, doctor, at 8 for injury documentation. Police station at 9:30. Courthouse at 11 for the protective order hearing. That fast? Illinois law allows emergency protective orders when there's evidence of domestic violence and imminent danger. Grace filed online last night using Nathan's video. The judge granted a temporary order. Blake can't contact you or come within 500 feet. Today we make it permanent. Robert poured coffee. But Charlotte, you need to prepare yourself. Blake will fight this. He'll say things about you, spread lies. It will get ugly. It's already ugly. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Her father's voice was gentle but honest. I need you to be strong for a few more hours. Can you do that? Charlotte touched her belly. For her, yes. At Dr. Winters' office, Charlotte stripped to her underwear while the forensic specialist photographed every bruise. The camera's click was clinical, detached. Did he hit you anywhere else? Dr. Winters asked. No, just grabbed my arms and wrist. Has he done this before? Charlotte hesitated. Not like this, but there were other times. He twisted my arm once when I tried to leave during an argument, squeezed my shoulder hard enough to leave marks when I talked too long to a male colleague. I thought I told myself it wasn't abuse. It wasn't punching or slapping, so it wasn't real violence. It was real violence, Dr. Winters said firmly. Abuse is about control, not just physical damage. She set down the camera. I'm going to document this in my report, not just last night's injuries, but the pattern. It matters. At the police station, Detective Sarah Bradford listened to Charlotte's statement with a neutral expression. Walk me through the evening again, Bradford said. Start with when you discovered the affair. Charlotte repeated it all. Finding the messages, the confrontation, Blake's grip, The threats about custody? Grace sat beside her, occasionally interjecting legal clarifications. I have video evidence, Grace said, queuing up Nathan's recording. Filmed by a witness, shows clear assault and threatening behavior. Bradford watched the video twice. This is good. Very clear. Mr. Harrison's lucky he didn't do worse damage. Pregnant women are particularly vulnerable. She looked at Charlotte. I'm glad you got out when you did. Am I in trouble for accessing his phone? No, as his spouse. You had legal access to shared devices. Bradford closed her notepad. I'm filing charges for misdemeanor domestic battery and assault. Given Mr. Harrison's resources and potential flight risk, I'll recommend bail conditions, including GPS monitoring and surrender of passport. At the courthouse, Charlotte sat in a waiting room while Grace filed paperwork. The protective order hearing was scheduled for 11, but at 10:45, Grace emerged looking grim. Blake's here with his entire legal team, 3 attorneys from Preston, Warner, and Locke. That's a $2,000 an hour firm. Charlotte's hands started shaking. Can he see me? No, the temporary order is still in effect. He has to stay 500 feet away. But Charlotte, they're going to fight hard. His lead counsel is Richard Sullivan, and he's vicious. I don't want his money. I want safety. I know. We'll make that clear. Grace squeezed her hand. Just answer honestly and don't let Sullivan rattle you. The courtroom was smaller than Charlotte expected. Judge Patricia Winters presided from the bench. Blake sat at the defendant's table flanked by 3 lawyers, looking every inch the wronged husband in his tailored navy suit. When his eyes met Charlotte's across the courtroom, she saw pure rage beneath the civilized veneer. Grace presented their evidence, Nathan's video, medical photos, Charlotte's statement, Dr. Winters' forensic report. Judge Winters watched the video without comment, then turned to Blake's attorney. Mr. Sullivan, your client has clearly shown restraining and threatening Miss Reynolds in that video. What's your response? Richard Sullivan stood. Your Honor, this video shows my client preventing his emotionally unstable wife from causing further disruption at a professional event. Miss Reynolds had just committed a crime illegally accessing Mr. Harrison's private communications. My client was attempting to calm her down. The phone access was legal. Grace shot back. Alleged affair, Sullivan corrected, which Ms. Reynolds cannot prove. As the messages are taken out of context, my client has never been unfaithful. He has, however, been subjected to increasing paranoid accusations over the past several months as Ms. Reynolds' pregnancy hormones have affected her mental state. Judge Winters looked at Charlotte. Miss Reynolds, I need to hear from you directly. Are you afraid of your husband? Charlotte stood. Yes, Your Honor. He told me if I pursued divorce, he'd take our baby and make everyone believe I was mentally ill. He said he has nothing to lose. That terrifies me. My client said no such thing. Sullivan interjected. That's Miss Reynolds' interpretation. The video shows him saying exactly that, Grace said sharply. Enough. Judge Winters held up a hand. I've reviewed the evidence. Mr. Sullivan, your client put his hands on his pregnant wife in anger and made threatening statements about custody. Whether or not the affair allegations are true, and those messages certainly suggest they are, the assault is documented. I'm granting the protective order for 6 months, renewable upon review. Blake's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched on the table. Mr. Harrison, Judge Winters continued, you are ordered to stay at least 500 feet from Ms. Reynolds at all times. No contact, directly or through third parties. You'll wear a GPS monitoring device so Ms. Reynolds can track your location via the Safe Home app. Violation of this order is a criminal offense punishable by immediate arrest. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Blake said through gritted teeth. As they left the courtroom, Charlotte saw Blake arguing with his lawyers in the hallway. This is a disaster, Sullivan was saying. The GPS monitoring makes you look guilty. I am not guilty, Blake hissed. She set me up. Charlotte hurried past with Grace and her father. In the car, she finally let herself breathe. It's done, Robert said. You're safe. But even as he said it, Charlotte's phone buzzed. A Facebook notification, someone had tagged her in a post. The post was from Vanessa Pierce's public account, heartbroken to see lies destroy a good man. Blake Harrison is the kindest, most professional boss I've ever had. The accusations against him are completely false, fabricated by a woman clearly suffering from prenatal mental illness. # stand with Blake. False accusations. The post had 400 likes already. Comments flooded in, poor guy. False accusations ruin lives. Pregnancy hormones are no joke. Why do women always try to take everything in divorce? Another gold digger caught lying. Grace took the phone from Charlotte's hands. Don't look at that. Don't engage. Everyone thinks I'm lying. No, everyone who doesn't know the truth thinks you're lying. Everyone who matters the judge, the police, the forensic expert knows the truth. Grace's voice was fierce. Blake is running a PR campaign because he lost in court. But Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Blake's PR campaign went viral overnight. By Monday morning, Charlotte's name trended on Twitter. Someone had leaked a version of Nathan's video, but edited to remove Blake's threats. Grace's phone rang at 7 a.m. No, my client will not be making a statement. If you print that quote without context, I'll sue you for defamation. Charlotte sat up in bed, her back aching. The baby did gymnastics against her ribs. Her father appeared with tea and toast. You need to eat. Cooper's office called. She wants to see you today. I can't go outside. Everyone's talking about me. Then we'll use the private entrance. Robert set the tray down. Charlotte, I know this feels overwhelming, but we're handling it. Grace has filed for an emergency hearing about the leaked video, and I've retained a crisis management firm. It won't matter. No one cares about truth. Charlotte picked at the toast. I've gotten 200 death threats on Instagram. Robert's expression turned to stone. Show me. Charlotte handed over her phone. Her father scrolled through the messages, his jaw tightening. This ends now, he said quietly. Grace, we're filing criminal harassment charges against every person who sent these threats, and we're suing Blake's PR firm. Grace appeared, laptop under her arm, already drafting it. But Robert, you need to see this. She pulled up a news article. Blake's lawyers filed an emergency motion this morning. They're seeking immediate modification of the protective order, claiming you and I are keeping Charlotte isolated. That's insane, Charlotte said. They're not denying the altercation. They're reframing it. They claim you grabbed Blake first, that he only restrained you to prevent you from hurting yourself. Grace's voice was tight. They've attached sworn statements from 3 witnesses, his business partners, all claiming they saw you attack Blake first. Who? His business partners, 2 senior VPs and a director from Harrison Commercial Properties, all claiming they saw you attack Blake first. Charlotte felt the room spin. I never touched him. I know, but they're willing to lie for him. Grace sat on the bed. This is what men like Blake do. They build networks of people who owe them favors. What about Nathan's video? They're claiming it was edited, that it doesn't show the full sequence, that you lunged at Blake seconds before Nathan started recording. Charlotte wanted to scream. What about the other people at the gala? The deputy mayor's wife looked horrified. Other people were recording. We're trying to track them down, Grace said. But most people don't want to get involved. Robert stood. Then we find the people who won't delete footage. Charlotte, think carefully. Who else was there? Anyone who might dislike Blake. Charlotte closed her eyes. There was a woman near the bar. She worked for Blake 3 years ago. She was staring at him like she wanted to kill him. That's useful. What else? The catering manager. I heard him arguing with Blake about payment. Blake stiffed them on the final invoice. Grace typed rapidly. I'll get investigators on both leads. Charlotte's phone buzzed. This time it was a call from an unknown number. She answered. Ms. Reynolds, my name is Jessica Brennan. I used to work for Blake Harrison. I saw what happened at the gala, and I have video, the real video, not the edited one. But I'm scared to come forward because Blake threatened me when I quit 2 years ago. Charlotte sat up straight. What kind of threats? He said he'd blacklist me from every real estate firm in Chicago if I ever talked about his behavior. I filed a harassment complaint with HR, but Blake's father-in-law owned the company, and they buried it. I still have the documentation. Jessica's voice shook. I'm willing to testify if you can protect me from retaliation. Wait, Charlotte said. Blake's father-in-law, you mean his first wife? He was married before you. Did you not know? The room tilted. Blake told me I was his first marriage. Grace and Robert exchanged sharp looks. He lied, Jessica said flatly. Blake was married to Amanda Harrison from 2012 to 2016. The marriage ended badly. There were rumors of abuse, but Amanda signed an NDA. She left Chicago entirely. Last I heard, she was in Seattle. Charlotte couldn't breathe. 4 years of marriage, an ex-wife who fled the state, an NDA about abuse. Do you know how to reach Amanda? Grace asked, taking the phone. No, but her parents still live in Oak Park. Her maiden name was Caldwell. Margaret and James Caldwell. Robert interrupted. From Caldwell Properties. Yes, I can get in contact with Amanda through them. Robert pulled out his own phone. If she's willing to testify about Blake's pattern of behavior, it could be game-changing. After Jessica hung up, Charlotte sat in stunned silence. He was married before, she whispered, and he never told me. That's fraud, Grace said. In Illinois, failure to disclose a previous marriage before getting married can void the current marriage, Charlotte. This changes everything. How? If your marriage to Blake is void due to his fraudulent concealment, the prenup is also void. You're not bound by any of its terms. Charlotte should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt nauseated. Who else did he lie to? What else was fake? Her father put a hand on her shoulder. That doesn't matter now. What matters is using every advantage to keep you and the baby safe. Over the next 3 hours, pieces fell into place. Jessica sent her video 10 minutes of unedited footage showing Blake grabbing Charlotte, threatening her, shoving her against the wall. She also sent her HR complaint, detailed accounts of Blake's inappropriate comments, his threats when she gave notice, his attempt to sabotage her new job. Then Grace's investigators tracked down the former catering manager. He had his own story. Blake had refused to pay the final invoice and threatened to sue when the manager tried to collect. But the real breakthrough came at 2 p.m. when Robert's phone rang with a Seattle area code. Mr. Reynolds, this is Amanda Caldwell. My parents said you needed to speak with me about Blake. Robert put the call on speaker. Amanda's voice was calm but carried steel. I heard about what he did to Charlotte. I want to help. I'll testify. I'll break my NDA if necessary. Amanda, Grace said carefully, breaking your NDA could have financial consequences. I don't care. Blake took 4 years of my life and made me think I was crazy. If I can stop him from doing the same to Charlotte, it's worth whatever it costs. Charlotte found her voice. What did he do to you? Everything he's doing to you, Tom. The isolation, the control, the gaslighting. The physical violence started small, grabbing my arms, pushing me, restraining me. By the end, he'd given me a concussion. Amanda's voice hardened. I have medical records, photos, a police report I filed, and then withdrew because Blake's family convinced me not to press charges. Why did you stay so long? Charlotte asked. Same reason you did. I imagine he was charming when he wanted to be. He made me believe I was the problem. It took my sister literally dragging me out one night after Blake threw a glass at my head for me to wake up. Grace took notes rapidly. Would you be willing to provide those medical records and photos for Charlotte's divorce case? Yes, all of it. I'll fly to Chicago if needed. After the call ended, Charlotte asked the question that had been building. Why did no one warn me if Blake had a history of abuse? Why did everyone just let me marry him? Robert's expression was pained. I tried to warn you, subtly. I told you to keep your own bank account, to stay employed, to maintain your friendships. You knew. Charlotte stared at her father. You knew Blake was dangerous, and you let me marry him. I suspected. I didn't know the extent until recently. Robert's voice was heavy. And Charlotte, you were so in love. Every time I questioned Blake, you defended him. If I'd pushed harder, you might have cut me off entirely. You should have told me about Amanda. I didn't know about Amanda until this morning. Blake's father-in-law covered it up thoroughly. Charlotte wanted to be angry, but she understood that Robert had been in an impossible position. I'm sorry, Mud, Robert said quietly. I failed you. You didn't fail me. You're helping me now. That's what matters. Charlotte took his hand. But Dad, we need to end this fast. I can't take months of public humiliation. We won't let it drag out, Grace promised. With Amanda's testimony and Jessica's evidence, we can file for expedited proceedings. 6 weeks, maybe 8, then you're free. But even as Grace spoke, Charlotte's phone lit up with another notification. Someone had leaked her home address online. We know where you're hiding. Your father's house in Lake Forest won't protect you. Robert saw Charlotte's face go pale. He took the phone, read the messages, and immediately called someone on speed dial. This is Robert Reynolds. I need a security detail at my Lake Forest residence immediately. Armed guards, 24/7 coverage. Right now. Charlotte realized with sickening certainty that this wasn't going to end quickly. Blake had turned her into a public villain, and half the internet believed his lies. She was safe from Blake physically, but her reputation, her career, her sense of safety, those were already destroyed. Charlotte's blood pressure spiked at her OBGYN appointment Tuesday afternoon. Ellen Cooper looked concerned. 160 over 105. That's dangerously high. Dr. Cooper checked Charlotte's ankles. The stress you're under this isn't sustainable. You're at risk for preeclampsia. I'm trying to stay calm. I know, but your body is responding to trauma. Dr. Cooper pulled up Charlotte's chart. You've lost 5 pounds in the last week. Your blood pressure has jumped 20 points. Charlotte, I need to be blunt if this continues. We're looking at potential premature labor, or worse. Charlotte touched her belly. The baby kicked weakly. What do I do? Minimize stress. Complete bed rest until your pressure normalizes. No social media, no news coverage, no court hearings if possible. That evening, Charlotte lay in bed, laptop balanced on her knees despite doctor's orders. She couldn't stop checking the news. Grace entered without knocking. You're supposed to be resting. I can't. Look at this. Charlotte turned the laptop. A new article, Real Estate Executive Blake Harrison speaks out, my pregnant wife needs professional help. Blake claimed he'd been trying to get Charlotte's psychiatric treatment for months. He painted himself as a worried husband, watching his wife's mental health deteriorate. The article included quotes from Blake's therapist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, confirming Blake had sought counseling about his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. This is insane, Charlotte whispered. I've never met this Dr. Morrison. Grace read over her shoulder. He's building a paper trail, creating a narrative where you're mentally ill and he's the concerned husband. But it's all lies. Lies that look credible in print. Grace closed the laptop. You can't keep doing this. Dr. Cooper said bed rest. That means no screens, no stress. How can I not be stressed when Blake is destroying my reputation? Because your baby needs you alive and healthy. Grace's voice turned gentle. I know this is hard, but we're fighting for you. Well, Charlotte wanted to believe that, but at 3 a.m. Wednesday morning, she woke to sharp pains. Contractions, regular, painful. Dad, she called. Something's wrong. Robert drove 90 miles an hour to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. By the time they arrived, Charlotte was doubled over. Contractions 4 minutes apart. I'm only 32 weeks. She gasped to the triage nurse. It's too early. We're going to do everything we can, the nurse said, pushing Charlotte's wheelchair toward the elevators. In labor and delivery, Charlotte was hooked up to monitors. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, fast and stressed. Dr. Cooper arrived within 20 minutes. We're going to stop this labor if possible, she said, checking Charlotte's cervix. You're dilated 3 centimeters, but the baby needs more time. I'm starting you on magnesium sulfate to halt contractions and betamethasone to mature the baby's lungs. Yes, Charlotte gripped her father's hand. Is the baby going to be okay? I don't know yet. 32 weeks is survivable, but there are risks. We need to keep you pregnant as long as possible. Cooper's face was grim. Charlotte, has anyone been physically rough with you since the gala? No, I've been staying with my father. Blake hasn't come near me. I'm asking because as sometimes abuse victims downplay. I'm not downplaying, Charlotte said firmly. This is just stress. Dr. Ma Cooper nodded but made a note. Since you have a protective order against your husband, I'm flagging your room as restricted access. Blake won't be allowed on this floor. The magnesium sulfate made Charlotte feel like she was moving through molasses. Her vision blurred, but slowly over 2 hours. The contractions eased. Dr. Cooper checked the monitors. Baby's heart rate is stabilizing. Contractions are spacing out. I think we bought you some time. How much time? Ideally, we'd get you to 37 weeks. Realistically, every day counts. You need to stay in the hospital under observation. Charlotte closed her eyes. Hospital meant no privacy. Hospital meant Blake would know exactly where she was. Sure enough, at 8 a.m., Blake's lawyer, Richard Sullivan, arrived at the nurse's station. Charlotte could hear him through her closed door. I'm here representing Blake Harrison. His wife is a patient on this floor. He has a right to know about his unborn child's condition. Mr. Harrison is listed as restricted access, the nurse said firmly. He cannot visit or receive information. That's a violation of his parental rights. I'm filing an emergency motion. File whatever you want, sir, but hospital security will remove you if you don't leave voluntarily. Sullivan left, but the damage was done. By noon, news outlets reported that Charlotte had been hospitalized, that Blake was being denied access to his own child. Blake's PR team released another statement. Blake Harrison is devastated that his wife's mental health crisis has put their unborn child at risk. He's being denied basic information despite having committed no crime. The comments exploded. Poor guy can't even see his own kid. That's cruel. She's using the baby as a weapon. Family courts are so biased against fathers. Charlotte lay in her hospital bed, tethered to IV lines and monitors, watching her life become a public spectacle. Grace arrived at 2 p.m. with a thick folder. I have good news and bad news. Good news, Amanda Caldwell is flying in tomorrow. She's bringing medical records and photos from her marriage. Jessica Brennan sent her complete HR file. Blake sexually harassed 3 different women over 5 years. We have a pattern going back a decade. And the bad news. Sullivan filed an emergency motion this morning. He's claiming the protective order is preventing Blake from exercising parental rights. The hearing is Friday, a day after tomorrow. Grace's expression was serious. Charlotte, Blake is going to fight for custody. He beats women and sexually harasses employees, and he thinks he'll get custody. He thinks his money and reputation will win. Grace sat on the hospital bed, but he made one critical mistake. What? He didn't know about Amanda. He didn't know his first wife kept evidence, and he didn't anticipate your father having the resources to fight back. Grace smiled grimly. Blake thought you'd be like Amanda alone, scared, willing to sign an NDA and disappear. He didn't count on you having backup. Charlotte looked at her father by the window. Robert had been so quiet since her mother died. Charlotte had almost forgotten that he'd built an empire through strategy and ruthless execution. Now she was seeing that side again. Dad, Charlotte said, what are you planning? Robert turned from the window. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. I'm planning to destroy Blake Harrison so thoroughly that he'll wish he'd never met you. By Thursday morning, Charlotte's blood pressure had stabilized enough for release with strict bed rest orders. Robert hired a private ambulance to transport her home, avoiding news cameras. At the Lake Forest house, Charlotte found her childhood bedroom transformed. Hospital-grade bed, IV stand, 24-hour nursing care. This is excessive, Charlotte said, though secretly grateful. It's necessary. Robert helped her into bed. Grace is coming this afternoon. Amanda Caldwell lands at 2 p.m. and we're meeting at 4, but I need you to hear what she has to say. The hearing is tomorrow. Should I be preparing? You're not testifying, doctor's orders. Robert pulled up a chair. But Charlotte, I need to tell you something about Blake. You need to understand. Charlotte's stomach tightened. What? Blake's not just an abuser. He's a predator with a pattern. He targets successful women from wealthy families, marries them, isolates them, and when the marriage ends, he extracts maximum financial settlement through intimidation. Robert opened a folder. Amanda Caldwell was victim number 1. She paid him $2 million to go away quietly when they divorced. He used that money to start his rise at Harrison Commercial Properties. He told me he built his career from nothing. He built it from his ex-wife's suffering. Robert handed Charlotte a spreadsheet. After Amanda, Blake dated 3 other women from prominent Chicago families. All relationships ended when they discovered his controlling behavior. None filed charges. Charlotte scanned the names. She recognized 2. Did he steal from them too? Not directly, but he leveraged those relationships to gain business connections, client referrals, insider information. Blake's entire career is built on exploiting women and their family networks. Robert's voice was flat. You weren't random, Charlotte. He targeted you because I'm a retired investment banker with substantial wealth. He saw you as his next payday. The words should have hurt more, but Charlotte had spent a week learning nothing about her marriage was real. Does he even want the baby? She asked quietly. No, he wants leverage. As long as you're pregnant with his child, he can play the concerned father, claim parental rights, drag out the divorce, and extract concessions. Robert closed the folder. That's why tomorrow's hearing is critical. We need to establish sole custody now, before the baby is born. Charlotte touched her belly, 32 weeks and change. What if I deliver early? Then we fight that battle in the moment. But Charlotte, I need you to trust me. Everything I've done buying Blake's company, contacting investigators, gathering evidence, it's all leading to tomorrow. Sullivan thinks he's coming to court to argue about a protective order. He has no idea what's about to hit him. At 4 p.m., Amanda Caldwell arrived. She was 38, elegant in a black suit, but her eyes were warm when she looked at Charlotte. You look like hell, Amanda said, sitting down. Which makes sense. Charlotte tried to smile. Thank you for coming, for agreeing to testify. I should have done it years ago, when I heard Blake was remarried. I almost warned you, but I'd signed that NDA, and my lawyer said breaking it would cost me everything. Amanda's jaw tightened. I let fear keep me silent. I won't make that mistake again. Grace set up her laptop. Amanda, I need you to walk through your marriage to Blake. Every detail. We're building a pattern of behavior case. For 2 hours, Amanda talked. Her story was Charlotte's story, the charming courtship, the subtle control that escalated to violence, the gaslighting. He broke my wrist once, Amanda said, showing a faint scar. Claimed I tripped on the stairs. The ER doctor didn't believe him, but I backed up Blake's story because I was terrified. She pulled up photos on her phone. Bruises, split lip, black eye. I documented everything the last year of our marriage. My sister helped me. She's a nurse. She knew how to photograph injuries for evidence. Charlotte saw her own future in those photos. If she hadn't found Blake's phone at the gala, if she hadn't had Grace and her father, this would be her in 5 years. Why did you finally leave? Charlotte asked. Blake threw a crystal tumbler at my head, missed by inches and shattered against the wall. Glass cut my face. Amanda touched her cheekbone, where a thin scar remained. My sister picked me up that night. I didn't go home. I filed for divorce the next morning and moved to Seattle within a week. And the NDA? Blake threatened to destroy my father's company. I was 26 and terrified. I took the $2 million and signed. Amanda's voice hardened. Biggest regret of my life. I let him get away with it, which meant he could do it again. You were surviving, Grace said firmly. You did what you needed to do, Bo. Robert had been quiet, listening. Now he spoke. Amanda, are you prepared for what happens when you testify tomorrow? Blake will claim you're lying. His lawyers will dig into your life. The media will make you a public figure. I know. I've been through therapy for years. I'm ready. Amanda looked at Charlotte. You saved yourself faster than I did. You gathered evidence. You had people who believed you. You fought back. I want to make sure you stay safe. If my testimony does that, whatever happens to me doesn't matter. After Amanda left, Charlotte lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Grace said, we're walking into that courtroom with Amanda's testimony, Jessica's evidence, Nathan's video, the forensic reports, and your father's financial investigation. Blake's lawyers have no idea what's coming. What are you going to do? Oh, Charlotte asked. Grace's smile was feral. I'm going to bury Blake Harrison so deep he'll never see daylight again. That night, Charlotte dreamed of the gala. But in the dream, when Blake raised his hand, she didn't flinch. She grabbed his wrist and twisted it until he dropped to his knees. Charlotte woke at dawn, her heart racing but her mind clear. Today was the day she stopped being a victim. The baby kicked once, hard, as if in agreement. "We've got this," Charlotte whispered. "Your grandfather's going to make sure of it." Charlotte wasn't allowed to attend Friday's hearing. Dr. Cooper had been adamant a month. Instead, Charlotte watched via video link from her bedroom, her father's tech team having set up a secure connection. Grace stood at the plaintiff's table in a crimson suit. Blake sat across the aisle with Richard Sullivan and two junior associates, his expression carefully neutral. Judge Patricia Winters called the hearing to order. "This is an emergency motion filed by Mr. Blake Harrison to modify the protective order. Mr. Sullivan, proceed." Sullivan stood. "Your Honor, my client is being denied fundamental parental rights. His wife is hospitalized with his child, and he's not allowed any information. This protective order has become a weapon." Grace rose. "Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Sullivan's characterization." "Objection," Sullivan said. "This is a hearing about modifying an existing order, not introducing new evidence. The evidence is relevant to whether modification is appropriate." Grace countered. Judge Winters looked intrigued. "I'll allow it. Proceed, Ms. Biz Mitchell." Grace nodded to her paralegal, who wheeled in a projector screen. "Your Honor, I'm calling Amanda Caldwell to testify." Sullivan's head snapped around. Blake went very still. Amanda walked to the witness stand with perfect composure. After swearing in, she looked directly at Blake. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Ms. Caldwell," Grace began, "how do you know Blake Harrison?" "I was married to him from 2012 to 2016. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sullivan half rose. "Your Honor, this is quiet, Mr. Sullivan." Judge Winters leaned forward. "Ms. Caldwell, you were married to the defendant for 4 years." "Yes, Your Honor. Blake never disclosed our marriage to Charlotte Reynolds before marrying her, which constitutes fraud under Illinois law." Blake's face flushed red. He leaned over to whisper urgently to Sullivan. Grace pulled up a document on the projector. "I'm entering into evidence the marriage license and divorce decree from Amanda Caldwell and Blake Harrison. The divorce included a non-disclosure agreement, which Ms. Caldwell is voluntarily breaking today." "Why are you breaking it?" Judge Winters asked Amanda directly. "Because I don't want Charlotte to go through what I went through." Amanda's voice was steady. "Blake systematically abused me throughout our marriage. Physical violence, emotional manipulation, financial control. When I finally left, he threatened to destroy my family's business if I spoke publicly." "Do you have evidence of this alleged abuse?" "Yes, Your Honor." Amanda opened a folder. Medical records documenting injuries, photos I took during the marriage, police reports I filed and then withdrew under pressure. And this, she held up a small audio recorder. Recordings of Blake threatening me during arguments. Sullivan shot to his feet. "Your Honor, those recordings were made without Mr. Harrison's consent. They're inadmissible under Illinois wiretapping law." "Actually," Grace said calmly, "they were recorded in Ms. Caldwell's own home during her marriage, where she had every right to record for her own safety. There's an exception in Illinois law for recordings made by domestic violence victims." Judge Winters considered this. "I'll allow the recordings. Ms. Caldwell, play one excerpt." Amanda pressed play. Blake's voice filled the courtroom. "You tell anyone about this, and I'll ruin your father. His company will be worthless in 6 months. Try me. Amanda." Then Amanda's voice shaking. "You broke my wrist. You fell? That's what you'll tell the doctor. Or your father's business is finished." The recording clicked off. The courtroom was silent. Blake's face had gone from red to white. Sullivan was frantically writing notes. "Your Honor," Grace said, "this is not a one-time incident. Blake Harrison has a pattern spanning over a decade of targeting successful women, isolating them, abusing them, and using threats to maintain silence." She handed the judge a thick binder. "These are statements from women Blake dated after his divorce from Amanda. All describe controlling behavior, verbal abuse, and threats when they tried to leave." Sullivan tried to recover. "Your Honor, these are vindictive accusations from women bitter about failed relationships." "Then let's discuss the workplace harassment." Grace interrupted. She nodded to her paralegal, who pulled up documents. Jessica Brennan worked for Blake at Harrison Commercial Properties from 2015 to 2017. She filed an HR complaint about sexual harassment. Blake's response was to threaten her job and blacklist her. Grace pulled up email after email. Blake's messages to Jessica were crude, inappropriate, clearly unwelcome. Jessica's complaints to HR were detailed and dated. Blake's final message when Jessica resigned: "You'll never work in Chicago real estate again. I'll make sure of it." "That's not workplace harassment," Grace said coldly. "That's career terrorism." Jessica was unemployed for 8 months before finding work in a different industry. Judge Winters was reading through the documents. "Mr. Sullivan, do you have a response to this pattern of behavior?" Sullivan looked at Blake, who was staring at the table. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. The HR complaint was investigated and found inconclusive because Blake's father-in-law owned the company at the time," Grace said. "The investigation was buried, but we have 3 other women from Harrison Commercial Properties who experienced similar harassment and are willing to testify." "This hearing is about a protective order," Sullivan said, his voice rising. "Not about my client's employment history. It's about whether Blake Harrison is a danger to Charlotte Reynolds and their unborn child." Grace shot back. "And this pattern abuse, manipulation, threats, retaliation establishes exactly that." Judge Winters held up a hand. "Enough, Mr. Mitchell. Is there more?" "Yes, Your Honor. One more witness." Robert Reynolds walked to the stand. Blake's head jerked up. His eyes widened. "What is he?" Sullivan grabbed Blake's arm, silencing him. Robert took the oath and sat down with the calm of a man who'd testified in high-stakes litigation before. "Mr. Reynolds," Grace said formally, "what is your relationship to Charlotte Reynolds?" "I'm her father." "And what is your professional background?" "I spent 35 years as an investment banker, specializing in commercial real estate acquisitions and corporate finance. I retired 3 years ago." Grace pulled up a new document. "Mr. Reynolds, are you familiar with Harrison Commercial Properties?" "Intimately. As of Wednesday this week, I own 51% of the company through subsidiary acquisitions." Blake stood up so fast his chair fell over. "That's impossible." "Mr. Harrison, sit down," Judge Winters ordered. Sullivan looked like he'd been hit. "Your Honor, this is a clear conflict of interest. It's shrewd business," Grace said. "Mr. Reynolds began acquiring shares 6 months ago, long before the current proceedings. He had concerns about the company's financial practices." "What concerns?" Judge Winters asked Robert. "Embezzlement, Your Honor. Over the past 4 years, Blake Harrison has diverted approximately $4.7 million through fraudulent property valuations, shell company transactions, and contractor kickbacks." Robert's voice was steady. "I've compiled evidence and turned it over to the FBI, the SEC, and the Illinois State Attorney's Office. Blake Harrison is under federal investigation as of yesterday." The courtroom exploded. Judge Winters banged her gavel. Blake was on his feet again, shouting at Sullivan. Reporters started typing furiously. Grace waited for silence. "Mr. Reynolds, why didn't you come forward with this information sooner?" "Because I needed to be certain. Financial fraud investigations require ironclad evidence. I spent 6 months working with forensic accountants to build an airtight case." Robert looked directly at Blake. "I also needed to wait until Charlotte was safe. Blake Harrison is dangerous when cornered. I wasn't going to expose his crimes until my daughter was protected from retaliation." Sullivan was arguing with Blake in harsh whispers. Blake looked like he wanted to lunge across the courtroom. Judge Winters banged her gavel again. "Mr. Sullivan, does your client have any response to these allegations?" Sullivan stood, his composure cracking. "Your Honor, this entire proceeding is a setup. Robert Reynolds has orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme. Because his daughter was beaten at a charity event," Grace corrected icily. "We have video evidence. We have medical documentation. We have a pattern of abuse spanning 12 years. This isn't revenge, Your Honor. This is justice." Judge Winters studied Blake. "Mr. Harrison, is what Mr. Reynolds said true? Are you under federal investigation?" Blake's mouth opened and closed. Sullivan put a hand on his shoulder, but Blake shoved it off. "That money it was invested back into the company." "Don't say another word," Sullivan hissed. But Blake was unraveling. You want to know the truth? Blake shouted at the judge, at Grace, at Amanda. Yes, I took money from the company. It was my company, my deals. I earned that money. Blake, stop talking. Sullivan grabbed his arm. And yes, I had relationships with women before Charlotte. So what Amanda signed an NDA, she can't testify. She can if the agreement was procured through fraud and duress. Grace said. Blake turned on her, his face twisted with rage. You think you're so smart, Charlotte will never survive this. The media will tear her apart. Everyone thinks she's lying. The media thinks what your PR team told them to think, Grace said calmly. But we're releasing the unedited videos today. All of them. Nathan Drake's footage, Jessica Brennan's recordings, Amanda's medical records. By tonight, the world will know exactly who you are. Blake lunged toward Grace's table. Two court bailiffs intercepted him, pulling him back. He struggled, still shouting. She destroyed my life. She violated my privacy. One of the bailiffs forced Blake into his chair. Sullivan was pale. Judge Winters waited until Blake stopped struggling. Her voice was cold as winter. Mr. Harrison, I've been a family court judge for 20 years. I've seen abusers, manipulators, and liars. You are all three. She held up the documents. This evidence paints a picture of systematic predation. You target vulnerable women, isolate them, abuse them, and when they try to escape, you destroy their lives. Your Honor, Sullivan tried to interject. I'm not finished. Judge Winters turned to Charlotte's video screen. Ms. Reynolds, can you hear me? Yes, Your Honor, Charlotte said from her bedroom. I'm making the protective order permanent. Mr. Harrison is prohibited from contact with you for the remainder of your life. He is prohibited from coming within 1,000 feet of you, your child, your father's home, or any medical facility where you receive treatment. Judge Winters looked back at Blake. Further, I'm ordering emergency sole custody to Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Harrison will have no parental rights pending the outcome of criminal investigations. Blake started to stand. The bailiffs pushed him back down. Your Honor, you can't, Sullivan began. I can and I am. Mr. Harrison has demonstrated himself to be a danger to Miss Reynolds and their unborn child. Until the federal investigation concludes, he poses a flight risk and a safety threat. Judge Winters signed the order with sharp strokes. Bailiffs, please escort Mr. Harrison from my courtroom. If he violates this order, he'll be jailed immediately. As Blake was let out, he turned back toward the video screen where Charlotte's face was visible. His expression was pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. You haven't won. That's enough, Mr. Harrison. The bailiffs pulled him through the doors. In her bedroom, Charlotte was crying, not from fear anymore, from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming realization that it was actually over. Grace appeared on the video screen, smiling. Charlotte, we did it. You're free. Robert was beside Grace. Come home, baby girl. We're done here. 3 weeks later, Charlotte sat in the renovated nursery at her father's house, folding tiny onesies while November rain pattered against the windows. She was 35 weeks pregnant now, past the danger zone. Dr. Cooper had cleared her for light activity as long as her blood pressure stayed stable. Grace knocked on the doorframe. Package delivery, legal documents you'll want to see. Charlotte set down a yellow onesie with ducks. Good news or bad news? Excellent news. Grace handed her a folder. Blake signed the divorce settlement. Full, uncontested. You get sole custody. He relinquishes all parental rights, and he's paying 5 years of child support up front, $2 million deposited this morning. Charlotte stared at the documents. He just gave up. He didn't have a choice. The FBI formally charged him yesterday with wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He's looking at 7 to 10 years in prison. His lawyers advised him that fighting a messy divorce while facing federal charges would destroy any sympathy a jury might have. Grace sat in the rocking chair. Also, Harrison Commercial Properties fired him. Your father's running the company now. Blake's reputation is obliterated. Charlotte should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. What about Vanessa? She flipped, testified against Blake in exchange for immunity. Turns out she was helping him cook the books. She knew about everything. She's cooperating fully with prosecutors. Grace's smile was sharp. Her social media post defending Blake has been deleted. She issued a public apology yesterday. So everyone who supported Blake is running. Pretty much. The media narrative has completely flipped. You're the brave survivor who exposed a criminal. Blake is the monster who fooled everyone. Charlotte read the article Grace showed her. It was fair, factual, and damning. Amanda's testimony was quoted extensively. Jessica's HR complaints were detailed. "How's Amanda doing?" Charlotte asked. "Good. She's back in Seattle. Her parents are proud of her. She's considering writing a book. She's gotten offers from several publishers." Grace put her phone away. "Charlotte, you saved her too. By standing up to Blake. By refusing to sign an NDA and disappear. You gave Amanda permission to tell her story. You broke the cycle." Robert appeared holding a steaming mug. Chamomile tea for the expectant mother. Charlotte accepted the mug gratefully. "Dad, what's going to happen to Harrison Commercial Properties?" "I'm restructuring it, selling off Blake's fraudulent deals, making victims whole, implementing new financial controls. It'll take a year or two, but the company will survive." Robert settled into the window seat. "More importantly, I've established a foundation, the Charlotte Reynolds Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors. We're funding legal support, safe housing, and financial assistance for women leaving abusive relationships." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "You named it after me. You're the reason it exists. If you hadn't been brave enough to fight back, to gather evidence, to expose Blake, none of this would be possible." Robert's voice roughened. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Charlotte touched her belly. The baby kicked, active and healthy. "I hope she's proud of her granddaughter too." "Speaking of," Grace said, "have you picked a name? Eleanor Patricia. Eleanor after Mom. Patricia after Judge Winters." Charlotte smiled. "Strong women who protected me when I needed it most." Over the next week, Charlotte's life slowly returned to normal. The media attention faded. Her LinkedIn messages shifted from harassment to job offers. 3 major marketing firms had reached out. She was considering a position at a women-owned agency starting after maternity leave. Nathan Drake stopped by with flowers. "I wanted to check on you and apologize." "For what?" Charlotte asked, genuinely confused. "For not saying something sooner. I saw how Blake treated you at company events. I should have pulled you aside and asked if you were okay." Nathan looked ashamed. "I was a coward. You recorded the assault. You testified. You risked your career to help me." Charlotte took the flowers. "You're not a coward. Nathan, you're a hero. I was fired because of that video." "I heard. But Dad's Harrison Commercial Properties is hiring. He asked me to give you this." Charlotte handed Nathan an envelope. Inside was a job offer letter. "Senior Marketing Director. Substantial salary increase. Start date January 1st. Nathan stared at the letter. "Is this for real?" "Very real, but my father doesn't believe in punishing people for doing the right thing. He believes in rewarding them." After Nathan left, Charlotte walked through her father's house, taking in the changes. Her childhood home had been so quiet after her mother died. Robert had retreated into grief, but now the house felt alive again. Robert had hired a housekeeper who cooked and laughed. He'd joined a running club. He'd reconnected with old friends. He was rebuilding his life just as Charlotte was rebuilding hers. That evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, Robert joined Charlotte with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Decaf," he assured her. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Charlotte asked the question she'd been holding back. "Did you regret letting me marry him?" Robert considered this carefully. "No, I regret not warning you more clearly. I regret not investigating Blake sooner, but I don't regret giving you the freedom to make your own choices. If I'd forbidden the marriage, you might have eloped. Blake would have isolated you even more effectively. So you let me walk into a trap. I let you live your life while preparing to catch you if you fell." Robert looked at her. "Charlotte, I knew you'd see through Blake eventually. You're too smart to be fooled forever. My job wasn't to prevent you from making mistakes. It was to make sure you survived them." Charlotte leaned against her father's shoulder. "I survived. You did more than survive. You fought back. You saved yourself and others." Robert put his arm around her. "That takes courage most people never find." Charlotte's contractions started at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in late December. Not the painful, frightening kind from her premature labor scare. These were strong, steady, and perfectly timed. Dr. Cooper confirmed she was in active labor at 7 a.m. Looks like someone wants to meet you before New Year's. Eleanor Patricia Reynolds was born at 2:17 p.m. on December 27th. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy lungs, perfect APGAR scores. Her mother's blue eyes and dark hair. Charlotte held her daughter for the first time and felt something click into place. All the pain of the past months, the betrayal, the assault, the public humiliation, the fear it all receded. Not gone, but manageable. Survivable. "Hello, baby girl," Charlotte whispered. "We made it." Robert stood beside the hospital bed, his eyes wet. He'd been in the delivery room throughout labor, never leaving Charlotte's side. Now he looked at his granddaughter with wonder. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." Grace arrived an hour later with balloons and tears. "Oh my God, she's so tiny and beautiful, and Charlotte, you did it. You really did it." "We all did it." Charlotte looked at the people surrounding her bed, her father, her best friend, the medical team that had kept her and Eleanor safe. "I couldn't have survived this alone." Dr. Cooper checked Charlotte's vitals one more time. "Your blood pressure is excellent. Heart rate normal. You're healing well." She smiled. "I'd say bringing your daughter into the world stress-free made all the difference." "Blake hasn't tried to contact you?" Grace asked, though she knew the answer. Blake had been in federal custody since last week when he'd violated bail conditions. "Not a word. I checked the news this morning. His trial date is set for March." Charlotte touched Eleanor's tiny hand. "By the time she's old enough to ask about her father, he'll be years into a prison sentence. She'll never have to meet him." "That's a gift," Grace said quietly. Over the next few days, visitors came in a steady stream. Nathan Drake brought a stuffed elephant. Amanda Caldwell video called from Seattle to see the baby. Jessica Brennan sent flowers with a note. "Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up." On Eleanor's third day of life, Charlotte got a call from Detective Bradford. "Ms. Reynolds Blake's attorney called this morning. He's taking a plea deal, 12 years in federal prison, full restitution to his victims, and permanent surrender of parental rights." Bradford's voice held satisfaction. "You won't ever have to worry about him trying to contact you or your daughter." Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. The last thread of fear, snipped clean. 12 years. The judge wanted to make an example of him. White-collar crime plus domestic violence, plus his attempts to intimidate witnesses. The sentencing guidelines gave the maximum. Bradford paused. "Ms. Reynolds, most domestic violence cases don't end this well. What you did documenting everything, getting out safely, pressing charges, not backing down, you probably saved future victims' lives." After the call ended, Charlotte sat in the quiet hospital room holding Eleanor. Through the window, she could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. It was the same view she'd had growing up, the same water, the same sky, but everything else had changed. She'd changed. Robert knocked softly before entering. "The discharge paperwork is ready. We can go home whenever you want." Home, Charlotte tested the word. It meant something different now. Not the penthouse with Blake. Not even necessarily her childhood bedroom. Home was wherever she and Eleanor were safe. Together. Free. "I've been thinking," Charlotte said as her father helped pack her hospital bag. "I want to go back to work. Not right away, I'll take maternity leave. But I want Eleanor to see me working, building a career, being independent. I don't want her to think women need to give up everything for relationships." "Good," Robert said firmly. "The foundation could use your marketing expertise too. We're expanding opening offices in 3 more states, helping hundreds of women leave dangerous situations." The Charlotte Reynolds Foundation. Charlotte still marveled at it. Women are calling it the CRF. Because you made it real. Your story, your courage, it inspired people to donate, to volunteer, to get involved. Robert zipped up the bag. "Ready to go home." Charlotte looked at Eleanor, sleeping peacefully in her hospital bassinet. So tiny, so vulnerable, so utterly dependent on Charlotte to protect her. But Charlotte had proven she could do that. She'd fought a powerful, dangerous man and won. She'd stood up in court, gathered evidence, refused to be silenced or intimidated. She'd survived. Ready, Charlotte said. The drive from Northwestern Memorial to Lake Forest took 45 minutes. Charlotte sat in the back seat beside Eleanor's car seat, watching Chicago's skyline fade behind them. Somewhere in that collection of steel and glass, Blake sat in a federal holding cell awaiting sentencing. His penthouse was being sold to pay restitution. His career was destroyed. His reputation was in ruins. Charlotte felt no joy in his downfall, no satisfaction in his suffering. She just felt free. Eleanor made a small sound in her sleep, and Charlotte reached over to adjust her blanket. Such a simple gesture, such a profound responsibility. You know what's strange, Charlotte had said to her father. I don't hate him anymore. Blake, I'm not angry. I just feel nothing. Like he was a storm I survived, and now the weather's cleared. Robert glanced at her in the rearview mirror. That's healing. Real healing. Not forgetting what happened, but refusing to let it define you. They pulled into the Lake Forest driveway just as the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house lights were on, warm and welcoming. Grace's car was already parked outside. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Grace had decorated with a Welcome Home Eleanor banner and balloons. I may have gone overboard, Grace admitted, hugging Charlotte carefully. But we're celebrating. You, your daughter, your new life, all of it. They ate dinner together, the four of them, Charlotte, Robert, Grace, and Eleanor, sleeping in a bassinet nearby. They talked about Charlotte's job offers, about Robert's plans for the foundation, about Grace's upcoming vacation to Italy. They didn't talk about Blake, didn't mention the trial or the media coverage or any of it. That chapter was closed. Around 9 p.m., Charlotte took Eleanor upstairs to the nursery. The room was perfect, soft yellow walls, white furniture, a mobile of stars and moons. Charlotte settled into the rocking chair and began to nurse her daughter. Eleanor's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and dark. She made small, contented sounds. I'm going to tell you the truth when you're older, Charlotte said softly. I'm going to tell you that your father was a dangerous man, that I made a mistake trusting him, that I almost didn't get away. She touched Eleanor's cheek. But I'm also going to tell you that I fought back, that I had people who loved me enough to help, that I refused to let fear win. Eleanor's tiny hand wrapped around Charlotte's finger with surprising strength. You're going to grow up knowing you're safe, knowing you're loved, knowing that women are strong and capable and don't need anyone's permission to live their lives fully. Charlotte's voice caught. I'm going to make sure of it. Robert appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. He set one on the side table and settled into the window seat. Your mother would have loved her, Robert said, watching his granddaughter. Eleanor would have doted on this little one. I wish Mom could have met her. She knows. Robert's voice was gentle. Wherever she is, she knows. And she's proud of you. Just like I'm proud of you. They sat in comfortable silence. 3 generations in one room. The oldest carrying memories of love and loss. The middle generation carrying scars and survival. The youngest carrying nothing but possibility. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Soft and clean, covering everything, making the world new. Charlotte looked down at Eleanor, now sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. She was free. Her daughter was safe. Her father was by her side. And ahead of them stretched a future full of hope and healing and second chances. The nightmare was over. The life she'd fought so hard to reclaim was finally, truly hers. And Charlotte Reynolds, survivor, mother, advocate, intended to make the most of every moment.